This tutorial focuses on instructional accommodations, the response type. I'm DJ Nicholson with Inclusiveology, and I've done some previous tutorials that focus on presentation accommodations. I've also done one that is kind of an overview of instructional accommodations, so you have the basic information. But in this tutorial, we're going to dig a little bit deeper into response options. So just as a review, accommodations are changes that are made in how a child accesses information and demonstrates their knowledge. So it's important to remember that not every child has to show what they know in the same way. That's why accommodations are so critical for students with disabilities, especially for students that have an individual education plan, have accommodations, and have specially designed instruction. So accommodations allow a child to complete an assignment or a task as other students would, but it permits a change in the way they're accessing material. So there can be changes in timing, the format, the setting in which the activity is taking place, an adjustment to the schedule, the way they respond, or how they're showing their what they've learned. So for the purpose of today, like I said, we're going to focus on response type. So accommodations do not change the content. They don't change the instructional level. So if you have a child in the 4th grade, they're still receiving grade level instruction, grade level content. The expectation is the same, but accommodations allow us to be a little more flexible in how students are showing their learning, and accommodations are going to provide that equity in how students are accessing the general education curriculum. So in a nutshell, accommodations are going to level the playing field and give them equity, opportunities, and supports in order to do some of the same work that other students are doing that don't have disabilities. So how are accommodations determined? Accommodations are never determined based on someone's opinion. So we're always taking a look at present levels of performance. We always consider data. Data is always used when we're determining accommodations, as well as looking at what are some of the barriers to accessing the content. And so when we talk about the word barrier, the child is not the barrier. The child's disability is not the barrier. What's happening in the educational environment that is the barrier. That's not happening to the child's benefit in order to help them access their learning. And of course, we're going to take a look at the level of independence. What are things that they can do really well? We want to always tap into their strengths. And then once accommodations are determined, we're going to evaluate if they're effective or not. And so if they're effective, of course, we want to keep them. If not, we want to go ahead and make some adjustments or changes. So whenever we're looking at adjusting and changing accommodations, again, we're going back, we're looking at the data pieces. The IEP team always reconvenes to adjust or change accommodations. Parents, accommodations are never changed without you at the table, and an amendment has to take place in order for accommodations to be adjusted or changed. So once they're adjusted or changed, then we can go ahead and consider the most important part, and that is how are we going to teach children how to use their accommodations? Because that's the purpose, is to teach them how to use their accommodations so they can feel independent, that they feel confident in the work that they're doing in their classroom. And so the most effective way to teach them how to use their accommodations is through explicit and systematic instruction. And so what I mean by that is that we, as the educators, we are modeling for children how to use the accommodation, and then we're working alongside them, we're guiding them through how it feels to use that accommodation, and then we're releasing them to use it independently, and we're giving them feedback and support as they start to use their accommodation and they start to feel more comfortable with it. Having accommodations really can minimize the need to have an adult hovering over your child. So when accommodations are taught how to be used, that is absolutely the most effective way to have accommodations and to show children that they can be successful and independent and confident in what they're learning at their grade level. So let's dig a little deeper into response type accommodations. So response accommodations are going to be a change in how learning is expressed and demonstrated. So let's take a look at 3 environmental barriers, remembering that there's not going to be a change in the expectation for learning. There's no change in the requirements of the task, and there's no change in what the student is learning along the way in order to meet a learning outcome. So that's really, really imperative to remember, that the expectation is still grade level, it's still age appropriate, and it's grade level content appropriate. So the first barrier we're going to take a look at is verbal communication. So if we have a child that is struggling with verbal communication, then we want to go ahead and give them something that's not in the environment already. So we want to give them an option to have different ways to communicate. So when we talk about verbal communication, sometimes, students don't use their voice as their primary means of communication. And so for those students, they're going to use augmentative alternative communication devices. Those are AAC devices. But sometimes, we just have students that have a language impairment, some other type of challenge where they're either not comfortable with their verbal ability, or they have a limited verbal ability, or they're not quite as verbal as their typical peers. So those children that are late talkers, they have trouble, putting words together in a way that makes sense. And so therefore, they have a delay in traditional communication. So when we look at verbal communication, we can consider giving them response options on a tablet or on a computer. We can have them express what they know using visuals or using gestures if it's a student with an intellectual disability. And there's always written language. So when I say written language, yes, written language is sometimes done with a pencil, but not for everyone. That will be a separate tutorial. But written language can be something as simple as not using a pencil, but rather dictating into, a word processing program, or using a speech to text program. And of course, there are students in the deaf and hard of hearing community that use sign language. So just some examples of AAC devices. So there's the Go Talk, there's multiple different kinds of AAC programs that you can put on tablets. There's Touch Chat, there's Proloquo to Go. These are all devices that you would work in conjunction with your special education teacher and the speech and language pathologist in order to find the best way to supplement their communication. So for our kiddos too that have more significant cognitive disabilities, an eye gaze assist is something that you could also use to have a student respond. That's something that you would absolutely have the assistance of the speech and language pathologist. And of course, in the upper right-hand corner, there's sign language. The second barrier that we'll consider is the barrier of written expression and organizing information. So sometimes information is given to students in a kind of one size fits all way. So the barrier is that the student needs an alternate way to respond. So maybe that, they struggle with writing, they struggle with their own organizing. And so the barrier is within that educational environment that they don't have access to, checklists and templates that are going to support with writing organization. It can be something as simple as an outline, or a graphic organizer that's chunked into 4 or 5 different pieces to show the parts of a paragraph, or to show the different parts of an essay. Graphic organizers are used a lot, especially at the elementary level, to organize information before students begin to write, before they begin to write. And then there's always speech to text software where the writing that would typically be done with a pencil is captured in a document. Fortunately, at the elementary school level, I see teachers multiple times using graphic organizers. And so there's a lot of graphic organizers out there that help with that organization. The other thing that I don't have listed here, and I'm not sure if it shows up later in the tutorial, is the idea of oral presentation. And so I say that lightly because we are talking about response type options. But if we have students, even if they're not typically verbal, or they have a language delay or are a late talker, sometimes even just to begin that process of orally practicing what they're wanting to write can be of help. So here's just some examples of some organizational templates and checklists. There's so many different options. And so, I mean, I love, my favorite, which, I used in school, which was just a classic outline, but there's all kinds of fun graphic organizers too that are colorful. So you can color code information for kiddos. And then there's a checklist if they need to visually see all of the things that they need to mark off and remember to do. So it might help with ordering what needs to happen. And then the last barrier is the barrier for mathematical computations. So at the elementary level, we're still using manipulatives, we're still using counters, we're still using multiple ways to access math computations. I know when I was in school, in elementary school, we used a half-size sheet of manila paper and we had a pencil. If we didn't have anything else to help us keep ourselves organized and help us respond differently when it came to solving a math problem. So thankfully now, there are tools out there that we can use and we can support kids with. So there's calculators, which I feel like I never thought I would say, but there's calculators available on almost every device out there. So that is absolutely a support that could be used in the classroom. There's the classic abacus, and I'm going to show you a great site where you can actually find a virtual abacus. It's fantastic. And then, having kiddos use concrete objects or manipulatives. So at the elementary level, if you're teaching some foundational mathematical skills and you're using blocks, it's possible that students might be better off using pom-poms or using Unifix cubes or something that interlocks together to give them more of a structure in order to respond that way with something that's a little bit more concrete. We can always support kids too as they get older with a sheet of basic math facts. And so having that visual support might help them be able to solve some mathematical problems, to help with that computation, knowing that they're being supported with basic math facts in order to respond accordingly with hopefully a correct answer. So here's the classic abacus, but this website, toytheater.com, and the abacus is at toytheater.com/abacus. This website is fantastic when it comes to virtual manipulatives. So there's virtual letters, there's virtual numbers, there's all kinds of virtual things that the kids can move. So if you have a kid that needs to use their hands, but they don't want to have the tactile experience on their desk or on a surface, and they like to use the computer, this is a great alternative. So toytheater.com, don't miss it. So like I always say with accommodations, there is so much potential and possibility for options out there. Today, we only looked at 3 different environmental barriers, so 3 different response type accommodations. When you take a look at the IEP, there's always, and in most states and most districts, there's a checklist that you can take a look at, but there's generally an opportunity for the IEP team to write in something that's a little bit more unique and kind of fine-tuned and designed for your child. So, have an open mind when you're considering accommodations. If you have questions, you can find me multiple places. So I have a parent coaching program to support your child with accessing information in the classroom, understanding how you can help your child be more engaged and more flexibly involved in their learning. My coaching program is the Empowered Parent, and you can find more information about that at inclusivology.com. I also have a Facebook group called The Collective for parents of children with disabilities, where you'll find resources, lots and lots of support, trainings, and a really great speaker series and opportunities for questions and answers, where we really kind of get a chance to dig deeper into how we can best support you. So thank you for watching this tutorial, and I'll see you next time.